On the coldest night of the year, when the wind howled like an animal desperate to escape its invisible cage and the streetlights shivered under the weight of winter's breath, Maya stood at the deserted bus stop clutching her son Arham close to her chest, her thin coat barely holding together against the merciless cold, her arms wrapped around him with a mother's desperation as his small body trembled uncontrollably, each shiver slicing through her like a blade. She whispered gently into his hair, trying to sound confident even though frostbitten fear was crawling up her spine, telling him, "Ba baby, thodi dur hour, we'll be home soon," though she had no certainty left, no warmth left, no options left, and the wind carried away her words before they even reached his ears. The city around them had emptied itself of all life, as if the world had pressed pause, leaving only the occasional echo of a passing car or the distant hum of a late-night taxi. And yet Maya remained there because she had nowhere else to go, no money for a taxi, no relatives to call, and no safe place except the tiny apartment they were trying to get home to. Her fingers were numb, her lips trembling, her shoes soaked from the half-hour walk they had already endured after her long shift, and she cursed under her breath when she realized the bus schedule board was dead, dark, and utterly useless, offering no sign of hope. Arham whimpered softly, his small hands clinging to her coat like a lifeline, and she pulled him closer, rubbing his back rapidly as if the movement might generate warmth that no longer existed in her body. The cold felt personal now, as though winter itself had chosen them to break, and for a moment she wondered if this night was going to be the final test life would force her to endure. Then, out of the heavy blanket of icy silence, footsteps approached, slow, steady, intentional, and Maya tensed instantly, shifting her weight protectively, turning slightly to hide her son behind her even though she could barely stand upright from exhaustion. A tall figure emerged under the flickering street lamp, grocery bags in one hand, the other shoved in the pocket of a thick black jacket that looked warm enough to last through a storm, his presence cutting through the lonely night with a strange mix of calmness and command. He was broad-shouldered, well-built, and walked with the kind of steady confidence that only men who had weathered many storms carried, his messy dark hair moving with the wind, and even before he spoke, Maya sensed something different about him, not threat, not danger, but a quiet strength. He slowed when he saw them, his eyes lingering on the shivering child and the way Maya tried to shield him with a coat far too thin for this weather. He didn't speak at first, just observed them with an expression that held no judgment, only recognition, as though he understood more than he let on. And then finally his voice broke through the air, deep, warm, startlingly gentle, when he asked, "Is he okay?" And Maya opened her mouth but the cold knocked her voice back inside, so when she finally managed to respond it came out shaky, "He's just cold, we're just waiting for the bus." But the man glanced at the dead signboard and replied with quiet certainty, "There's no bus coming tonight. They changed the schedule last month." And her heart dropped so hard she thought she might physically fall forward because if there was no bus coming then she was stranded in the freezing night with a child who could barely keep his eyes open from exhaustion, and she had no idea how to get home. Before panic could swallow her whole, he set his grocery bags on the bench, unzipped his jacket, and stepped forward, draping it gently but firmly across her shoulders and her child in one fluid motion. It was warm, shockingly warm, and thick, wrapping around her like a cocoon, carrying his lingering body heat which seeped into her frozen skin like fire. And she gasped, her knees nearly buckling. "No, you don't have to," she protested, but he shook his head with a simple honesty that softened her resistance instantly and said, "You're freezing. Both of you." "I'm okay." He's not, and despite her fear, despite every warning life had drilled into her, something about his voice made her trust him. Not fully, but enough to breathe again. Arham peeked up at him with weak eyes, and the man crouched, meeting him at eye level, asking softly, "Feeling warmer, buddy?" And Arham nodded shyly, burrowing deeper into the jacket. Maya felt a surge of gratitude so overwhelming it made her chest ache, but mixed with it was a fear of accepting help from a stranger, because life had taught her that kindness always came with a price. But then the man stepped back respectfully, not invading her space, not pushing, and said, "My car is just around the corner. I can drop you home." And Maya's instincts fired, alarms blaring, but before she could refuse he nodded as if reading her mind and added, "You don't know me. You shouldn't trust people easily." "You're right," and then he pulled out his phone, showing her his ID without hesitation. Zayn Malik, CEO, Malik Construction Group, a name she recognized instantly because it was one of the biggest contracting companies in the city, one she had heard about from co-workers, known for building shelters for underprivileged families and offering jobs to single parents, and she stared at the ID, then at his face, realizing she had seen him before in passing news headlines about a widowed father raising his daughter alone while running a business empire. And suddenly the pieces connected. His gentleness, his patience, the sadness tucked into the corners of his eyes. And Maya felt her guard lower inch by inch, not because he was rich or well-known, but because his eyes held a kind of grief that mirrored her own. He stood there shivering in his t-shirt now, the wind slapping at his arms, yet he didn't move, didn't rush her, only said softly, "I'm not leaving until I know your son is warm." And something inside Maya crumbled, something she had held tight for too long. Fear, pride, loneliness. And with a trembling whisper she said, "Okay." And he exhaled in relief, picking up his grocery bags and walking ahead of them but keeping a careful distance so she wouldn't feel pressured, glancing back every few seconds to ensure they were managing. Maya adjusted the jacket around Arham, the fabric enveloping both of them in safety, and as she followed him down the icy sidewalk, her son held tightly in her arms, she felt warmth spreading through her chest. Not from the jacket, but from the realization that for the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at her and her child with genuine care. Zayn unlocked his car, opened the back door for them without touching or crowding, turned the heater on full blast, and passed a small pack of hot chocolate he had just bought from the store to Arham, saying, "It's still warm. Drink it slowly." And Maya watched her son's eyes brighten as he held the warm cup, the first spark of comfort he'd felt all night. And when Zayn finally sat in the driver's seat, blowing into his cold hands and starting the engine, he glanced at them in the rearview mirror and said, with a softness that made Maya's breath hitch, "You're safe now." And she believed him, not because she was weak, not because she wanted to rely on someone, but because his voice carried a truth she hadn't heard from anyone in years. As the car pulled away from the silent street and the city lights reflected in the windows, Maya rested her cheek against the top of her son's head, wrapped in the warmth of a stranger's jacket, and wondered how a night that began with fear could suddenly feel like the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Something warm, something hopeful, something fate had quietly written long before she ever stepped into the cold.